In this video, I'm going to talk a bit about the routing of Crystal Downs Country Club in Michigan, here in the United States. This course was designed by Alister Mackenzie and Perry Maxwell, and it was recreated in PGA Tour 2K21 by the CLV24. So in this video, we're going to discuss the goals that an architect tries to achieve when routing a golf course. So here's a quick survey of the piece of land that Crystal Downs Country Club occupies. We see that it's right next to a lake. That's Crystal Lake in Michigan. And it's a pretty interesting piece of land. There's kind of this rumpled open area that the front nine occupies. You can see the clubhouse is up on this little ridge here. And then at the far end of where the front nine lies is a second ridge. And then we see that there's furthermore, if you go up to this upland here on this ridge overlooking the lake, you also have some more holes. That's where a lot of the back nine sits. So we're going to talk about kind of how the architects of Crystal Downs maximized the land that they had, and we'll use this as sort of a case study to talk about what the purpose of a routing is. So the purpose of routing the golf course is to, number one, instill variety and show off the most interesting features in a property. So, of course, this can be a challenge when you're routing a real golf course. If you're designing in PGA Tour 2K21, you do have quite a bit of creativity at hand because you have complete control over the plot and the land. So, nevertheless, I think a lot of the principles involved in routing a real golf course also apply to routing fictional courses in a video game. So the number one purpose is instilling variety, because if you use unique features that the land gives you, you're more likely to come up with unique hole ideas than if you just try and come up with everything sort of sui generis from your own mind. You'll tend to use the same ideas over and over again. The other purpose that goes hand in hand with the first is to find the good sites for greens and tees that, again, sort of helps you inject this variety by using different but interesting sites for the greens can give you a variety of interesting golf holes. So we'll see how Mackenzie and Maxwell found these interesting green sites and how they kind of work within the routing of this course. But other than that, there really aren't any rules for how to route a golf course. There's no rule that the 18th hole has to be a long par 4. There's no rule that you need to have 2 par 3s and 2 par 5s per 9, or that the 9th hole needs to return to the clubhouse. In a lot of courses that does happen, but you shouldn't feel constrained to do that certainly in PGA Tour 2K21, because it's a video game. You don't have to return to the clubhouse at the 9th hole. And furthermore, this video is not necessarily going to be a list of to-dos. My friend Ben, B101, he has an excellent video where he talks about a lot of ideas and gives you lots of concrete tips to incorporate as you route a golf course. So I will link to his video in the description. I will also link to an excellent plot creation tutorial that was recorded by Jeremy Mayo, and it was recorded in PGA or the Golf Club 2019, but the same principles apply to creating interesting plots in PGA Tour 2K21. So that's worth a watch too. Of course, you can always just use the auto-gen created land that the designer gives you in the game. So in a second, we will go ahead and take a quick tour of the front nine and look at how these different landforms got used. So let's talk a bit about the front nine here at Crystal Downs. So it occupies this open site. You can see that there's not too many trees, pretty open, and plays between this ridge that the clubhouse is on right here. And then there you can see that there's another smaller ridge that's kind of at the far end of the property, right? You can see it. It's just to the left of that that red tree, kind of in the toward the center of the screen here. So those are kind of the two key features that get used here. And in between, you see you've got some nice humpy, bumpy land that creates some interesting ground contours. And that's really what gives the front nine of this course its character. So let's just kind of walk through the front nine here, and we, instead of talking about the individual holes in terms of strategy or anything like that, we're just going to kind of talk about the land that it occupies and how it takes advantage of it. So we see that on the first tee, right, we're up on the ridge that the clubhouse occupies, and you have this nice open, inviting tee shot, right, down the hill. Makes you excited to play golf. So we have this inviting opening tee shot. So that plays down here, and you see there's this little hill that the first green is sort of benched into. So that can be a good place to put a green, is kind of benched into a hillside, right? It creates this high and low on either side of the green, and you can use that to enhance the strategic interest of the hole. The second hole, it actually just doubles back and plays up, and you can see that the green is essentially sort of benched into the hillside of the ridge that the first tee is on. And a few courses do this. So a famous example would be Riviera, where the first hole you're teeing off essentially the cliff that the clubhouse sits atop, and then the second hole plays back, and the green is sort of benched into that hillside. So sometimes you can see similar tactics used on multiple courses. Number 3 and 4, essentially what happens is it starts heading out towards that ridge that's at the opposite end of the property. Okay, because that's an interesting feature of the property, and the architects wanted to make use of it. So we see that 3 is a par 3. You can see that it kind of goes along the property edge. Then there's that hillside. Again, you kind of have this benching into the hillside of the green. So similar green sites for the first 3, although they are a little different. 4, we can see now is a dog leg right along the property line, and we're going to start climbing up a hill ever so gently. And we've essentially made it out to the ridge, and that's where the 5th hole is. So you can see the ridge out here. And this is a hole that's extremely unique, and and the neat thing about it is that it plays along top of the ridge. So sometimes, especially newer designers, and you're probably getting feedback maybe on a few early designs of yours. You probably hear a lot of advice about sight lines and making sure all the bunkers are nice and visible and you can see the fairway, and that's good advice. But I think sometimes people can take it on a little too liberally, and you end up making golf holes that look the same. So here we have a ridge, and notice that the fairway essentially kind of straddles the ridge, so it sort of plays along top of it. And this hole looks quite unusual, but it's actually very strategically brilliant. And essentially you have this green here. It's a short par 4. The green runs off to the right. So you're tempted to play left off the tee. So you're on more of a direct line of the green, and you can leave yourself a short little pitch. But if you do miss left with your drive, the green runs severely away from you, and you are in trouble. So a very unique hole by making use of this ridge, and notice that it plays along the ridge. So number 6 goes out this way, and you can see it plays away from the ridge, and it makes use of this interesting little hill that the drive plays over. And then number 7 goes back towards the ridge, so we're going to use it again. Okay, that's kind of the neat thing. So 5 was kind of draped over the top of the ridge, 7 plays back towards it, and this is an example of where kind of taking what the ground contours give you can really create something unique. So 7 at Crystal Downs is a short par 4, and you see this boomerang shaped green, and it sits in this little pocket, right, that's kind of at the top of the ridge. And so although this is extremely unusual, it really fits in well with the land, right? So sometimes when I see less experienced designers, they're trying something creatively bold, which is good. But they try that with unusual green shapes, but it's just in the middle of an open field, and it just kind of feels forced. So these tend to work better when it seems like it's just kind of following the natural pattern of the land. And then 8 is, again, we're basically leaving the ridge that had all that interest that we used for they took advantage of on 5, 6, and 7. We're going to play away from it. And it's a long par 5, and it's heading back towards the ridge that the clubhouse was on. And you've got all this humpy bumpy land here. Notice that there's no need for bunkers here, right? Because the land forms are so interesting and lend so much playing interest that really adding bunkers doesn't really help. So certainly you need to think very carefully with your second shot where you want to be. And the green, notice how the green is a little bit different from the others ones. It falls off at the front, and it also falls off at the back, and then it rises up on the left, and then ever so slightly rises up on the right as well. So the green is kind of at a saddle point. So that's another interesting place where you for a potential green site of these so-called saddle points. And this is a par 5, so you could think of it as sort of being reachable. The green's not very big, so if I miss long and the pin's in the front, the green's racing away from me. It's all too easy to be a little over aggressive with your chip and just chip it back over the front. So again, just through taking advantage of this site here, you can create a lot of interest. And notice that there's 2 pretty perfunctory greenside bunkers, but still the hole holds a lot of interest. And then the final hole of the front 9 is number 9, and that plays along the ridge that the clubhouse is on, right? So you'll notice that some holes have kind of played along the base of a hillside, others play up and over ridges, some play along the tops of ridges. So again, notice the variety in the settings for the holes. So they aren't all going through valleys, even though those might kind of look the prettiest at first glance. But 9 is just a par 3, and it plays up along this ridge. And you can see you have this fall off left of the green, and it sits at the foot of the clubhouse here. So again, the holes kind of look simple, but they occupy all these different landforms so interestingly that it creates a lot of variety. And so that is the front 9. So in a second, we'll talk about the back 9, and that will hit on a few other concepts. So the back 9 at Crystal Downs occupies some different land than the front 9 does. So we said the front 9, it occupies this open land off this way. It's largely treeless. And again, it features holes that interact with the land in different ways to create variety. And I kind of mentioned this before, but always be mindful of variety. Try and create plots that have these interesting features, or if you're just using the auto-gen terrain, look for those interesting features and think of unique ways in which you can incorporate them. So we said that one of the key features of the plot is this ridge that the clubhouse sits on, and you can see that like the 9th hole comes back along this ridge, and the front 9 is all off on that side. Off to the other side of the ridge, we have 10 and 18. So they kind of share this same sort of parcel. So the back 9 is kind of split into 3 parts. There's 10 and 18 here, which is kind of on the same, more or less the same plot of land as the front 9. And then 11 and 17 are sort of transition holes through the woods here. And then holes 12 through 16 you can see off in the distance there. Those are up on that sort of broad upland. So it creates a lot of variety within the 18 holes. So I will say that the back 9 is generally less well regarded than the front 9 at Crystal Downs, but I still think has some very interesting golf holes, and shows off kind of the ways you can inject variety into a golf course just by thinking about where you put the greens and the tees. So here we are on the 10th tee. It's a bit like the first hole in that we're teeing off from the ridge that the clubhouse sits on, off into this sort of inviting fairway, and then the second shot is uphill to this green that again is kind of benched into the hillside. So again, that kind of creates, just by virtue of the land it sits on, it creates this interest, right? You can see that missing right is going to be problematic, and so that's kind of on your mind as you're teeing off and kind of thinking about, okay, where do I place my tee shot? 11, you can see, is this longish, mid to long par 3, and it tees off over this valley, and it's going through the woods. So you can see we're kind of transitioning into a different environment. And you see that you have this very abrupt landform. So sometimes par 3s can be very useful to go through those, because then you don't really have to worry about playability concerns with people's tee shots kind of bounding all over the place over severe terrain. So that is the 11th. Then we transition into this again, the upland here, where we tee off on 12, and admittedly, the land that 12 and 16 here occupy is actually probably the most boring land on the property. Of course, if you're designing in a video game, you can do anything you like to make it interesting. But it can be interesting to think about how architects can kind of make something out of it. So this hole is a gentle dogleg right, and it doglegs it away in at a point where it makes hitting driver kind of awkward. So that's just an example of how you can just very subtly inject some interest on a hole that's not all that maybe not on all that interesting land. So, but nevertheless, you can see like this bunker here, that's kind of an artificial hazard. So in areas where you don't have as much interest, right, that might be a good place to maybe do something a little more contrived and force the issue a bit. 13 actually subtly makes use of some fairway camber. It may not look like very much, but you see that there's this gentle rise on the fairway to the left. So we've got this camber from left to right. So, unless you have a strong reason to, don't feel like you have to completely flatten all your fairways and make them totally smooth. We've seen plenty of examples, especially on the front nine here, of very lumpy fairways and how those really kind of add to the charm and interest of the course. And we see the green here sits on this little precipice. So you've got trouble right, but if you kind of hit your tee shot out to the left, which is marginally safer, right? You're kind of playing further away from the woods. You're going to have the ball sitting below your feet, so it's going to be very hard to keep it to the left. Moreover, you have this you can see this spine in the green kind of on the left side. So if the pin's in the back, you can see that coming in here from the left, especially with the ball below your feet, is going to be very challenging. So again, just very subtle use of the land to create interest, right? So that you didn't feel like the need to create some elaborate split fairway or anything to set up an interesting situation. And then we get to 14, and the 14th green on this course is the furthest point from the clubhouse. And what's kind of neat about it, of course, it's a par 3. It's just kind of a tranquil location. Of course, this is kind of a limitation here because this is on the edge of the plot, so you don't really have a nice view of anything, but you could imagine in real life that you would have this would like open up some kind of beautiful vista. And again, just kind of, you're at the furthest point of the clubhouse. You feel like you've made some kind of journey out here. And in this case, we have this skyline green which maybe we really haven't seen any of those yet on the routing. So this is kind of a unique look off the tee. So here on the 15th tee, we've now made the turn for home, and this hole, you can see that the key ground feature that it's kind of taking advantage of here is this ridge here that the fairway tumbles up and over. And again, it's just a matter of creating an interesting situation that you have to deal with on the tee shot. And then next we have the 16th hole, and the 16th hole is a long par 5, and I mentioned this before, but it is kind of an uninteresting piece of land. It's fairly flat, and this is a tactic that a lot of architects use, and that is if you have a big piece of kind of a stretch of kind of boring looking land, try and take it all up in one golf hole. Right, so that's why oftentimes if there's a long stretch of a less interesting part of the property, they'll put a par 5 there so it doesn't end up, having 2 holes on it, so you get it over in one shot. Of course, again, if you're designing in PGA Tour 2K21, you have all kinds of creative license to make this more interesting. So, for example, just one way I might do this, again, we have totally free creative control and free reign. Maybe we knock down some of these trees, manipulate the land, and turn this into a thrilling kind of par 5 that's overlooking the lake. That would be pretty neat. Maybe we would raise up the land that number 12 is on a little bit so again you can kind of look across and you can see that lake. That's just an idea. Obviously, people building this real golf course do not have that kind of creative liberty. So that's 16. And again, it's not the most interesting hole in the world, but it's worth noting that this is a way that you can kind of gobble up a big stretch of kind of uninspiring land and get it over with in one hole. So then we get onto the other side of these woods and we get onto 17. And so 17 is the other transition hole. So we're going from the uplands back to that kind of open land that the front 9 and the clubhouse are on. And 17 is a short par 4. And again, this is a transition hole, and just like we saw with 11, it goes over a pretty abrupt piece of land, right? You can see this severe drop off the tee. The green is up on this little precipice, and this is a short par 4, so that's a good place to put it, right? You wouldn't want like a long par 4 necessarily to occupy this land because, there's a good chance your ball's not going to stay in the fairway. You're probably going to you might have a really awkward stance when you're giving the player a long iron, and the green is, falls off on lots of sides. So it really would just, not necessarily unfair, but maybe a little overly punitive. We have another nice skyline green here, and you can see that it kind of falls off on all sides, right? It's small. There's trouble left. If you try and drive the green and you go long right, look out, you're going to bound down there, and you're going to be scrambling to make par. So you can see you have this kind of little severe patch of land that you have to get over to get to the finishing hole. But again, par 3s, short par 4s, those are good. Those are kind of good types of holes to deploy over very severe terrain where it can seem like, okay, it's not all that easy to put a hole here. So again, maybe don't give into the temptation to just kind of totally flatten everything, okay? Because you might be kind of sacrificing it or missing an opportunity to make something unique. And then 18 is kind of a classic finishing hole, right? You see we're on this elevated tee. It's another, much like kind of the tee shots on 1 and 10, a nice beautiful view of this sweeping fairway. And in this case, the fairway, we're kind of teeing off down into this valley, right, where the fairway is in between the ridge that the clubhouse sits on, and then this hillside to the right. So again, the rest of the back nine is kind of like up and over that hill there. And then so you're hitting a nice a beautiful tee shot down into this valley, and then the green kind of sits at the end, and it's slightly raised above the fairway with the clubhouse up here, right? So again, kind of another unique look. And you could imagine putting this green elsewhere, right? Maybe you would put it closer to the clubhouse, so the second shot is a little more demanding and uphill. That's another option one might take. But all in all, it's an interesting end to the back nine at Crystal Downs. So what I hope you can appreciate from this video is the way that this routing explores different features of the property and utilizes them in a variety of ways to create unique holes. And especially really on the front nine. So again, you'll want to notice how the holes interact with the ground in different ways. So that's the kind of thing you want to ask yourself about when you're routing. So again, the name of the game is variety. Maybe you've thought about things like this before in terms of like different hole yardages. Are my par 3s? Am I hitting different clubs into my par 3s? That's all important stuff. But I think what can sometimes be overlooked is just thinking about the different ways in which your holes interact with the land. And by keeping these things in mind, looking for different interesting green sites, making sure the holes kind of play over and through and along different ground features in a variety of ways can really help you get a great start and create something unique. So I hope that you enjoyed this and found it helpful. I do recommend you give this course a play. It may look pretty simple, but the CLV did a terrific job in recreating this course. It's pretty short, so if you do play it, maybe don't use the 295 driver, but definitely worth a play. And I think I'll probably be doing a few more of these with some other different classic courses. So until then, thanks for watching.